And I will hand over to Miriam Donohoe to kick us off. Miriam, if you just want to let me know when to hit to the next slide, I will do that. You're on mute there, Miriam.
Great, sorry about that. Thanks very much, Claudia and Niall and Dóchas for the invite today. Can you hear me okay, Claudia? Can you hear me okay?
Yep, all good.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. So listen, it's fantastic to be here and fantastic to have this spotlight and focus on something that's so important in our sector. So just a quick background on myself. I was a journalist for 27 years, and 3 of those years I was a news editor in the Irish Times, where I would have been part of photo selections. I left journalism and I went into communications and PR. From there, I spent time in Uganda doing volunteering for a hospice, and I resolved to work full-time in the sector. So I did 2 years with Goal as a communications manager, and then almost 2 years more recently for Trócaire as head of communications. And I'm back in Uganda. I'm here actually for the year doing volunteer work, leading mainly on communications and advocacy for Hospice Africa, Uganda. And just to say, it's interesting for me coming from journalism, where you had a whole different approach to storytelling in this sector. And that's been quite a learning for me. And I recall when I was news editor of the Irish Times on December 26th in 2004, the day of the dreadful tsunami in Asia, and sitting with the then picture editor, Peter Thursfield, that evening, looking through wire photos and trying to select a picture for the front page. And, you know, looking for, I suppose, the most gruesome and impactful picture that we could find without any consideration for the dignity or for ethics. And I think in these days, this would be called clickbait. But today, in those days, it was trying to have the most impactful picture to have more sales the next day. The next slide, please, Claudia. So, I mean, you've all, I'm sure, read the guidelines, and I'm not going to go into this in any great detail because Andrew, who I have worked with here in Uganda, will do so. But you know, we all know about the power of imagery in NGO work and NGO communications. You know, images that have to be emotive, to build empathy, to tell the story and inform, as well as driving donations. An image can really enhance storytelling, and is the single most important component of, you know, content gathering in our sector. And it can do more to generate support than the written word. And it really brings a crisis or a story to life. And I just have included 3 pictures here from a field visit I did with Trócaire in 2023 to Somalia. And Somalia was in the midst of a critical hunger crisis. And I just thought those pictures fit within the guidelines, and I thought they were impactful without being too distressing. The top picture of the mother and her son, and I remember they just arrived, having walked for days, to a displaced camp. They were hungry, and just the look in her face and in her eyes, the dead look, it just summed up exactly the situation she was in. And the middle picture then, in terms of our sector as well, it showed, you know, humanitarianism in action. So a Trócaire employee, you know, putting his hand on a little boy. It showed him in a caring mode. And I think that's something which is so important for the public to understand and to want to support as well. And then trying to, I suppose, reflect the actual horror of drought. The picture of animals who had died did that. The next slide, please. So we all face dilemmas every single day when we're taking pictures, whether it's for donor reports or for social media or blogs or media. And there's a huge or fine balance between using, you know, powerful emotional images that will raise awareness and funds, and being ethical and observing, you know, the dignity of the people who we're telling stories about. I mean, it's so easy to forget that, we mustn't use images that strip away people's dignity and reduce them to symbols of suffering and objects of pity. They need to be portrayed as entire whole human beings. And something I've learned as well in my work with hospice, and I'll go through that in a second, but was even when you do get written consent, that isn't enough to justify using particular pictures, because you have to be the judge of whether that picture is exploitation of an individual or not. And I thought I would just use these two images here. We all probably remember this very, very sad story of the 3-year-old Syrian boy who was washed up on a beach in the Mediterranean Sea in 2015. And it was an image that really shocked people all over the world. It also sparked furious debate around the rights and the wrongs of using the picture, the top picture there of little Alan on the seashore. And there was many arguments, including from NGOs, that this picture was necessary because, it told a story in very stark terms, and that it may be the catalyst to get some real action to tackle the refugee crisis. Well, that didn't happen. And I think, from me anyway, that picture was so exploitative, so disrespectful to the deceased little boy and his family. I mean, his whole little life was exposed there to the entire world. As a matter of interest, only one newspaper carried that picture at the time on the front page, and that was the Star. And I remember then editor Jerry Colleran having a furious debate about this. I think it was with Pat Kenny on RTE Radio. The second picture there, where the policeman had picked up Alan and Alan's face wasn't visible, I think that was way more appropriate and probably would have had, in my view anyway, the same impact. The next slide, please. So I'm going to be honest here, and I'm going to say I made so many mistakes in my first couple of years working in this sector, having left journalism and comms. And I was looking back at pictures last night, and I have to say I was cringing. But I'll be honest with you, and this was, I mean, I had no, I suppose, guidance. Maybe I was still thinking too much like a journalist, but my focus with Hospice Africa Uganda was to tell the story, not to sanitize it. And presuming that would glean support and funding. So these are some of the pictures that I would have posted on the hospice website, on my own social media, and hospice social media. I mean, the first one, is a patient who I got to know pretty well called Jovia. I knew her over a period of 6 weeks before she died, and she had cervical cancer and AIDS, and she was in a really terrible condition. She was emaciated. You can see her bones are protruding there, and she was holding a picture of herself when she was healthy. And it's a picture I really regret I ever exposed her to. The next patient was a woman with breast cancer, and as you can see, she's not covered. The next picture was a woman with a cancer in her leg, and it's very hard to look at it. And the fourth picture, while the woman there wasn't covered up, but there's another serious error there, is that I put myself in the picture. And, in the field and gathering content, it is not about the content gatherer. And they should stay well away from these pictures. It's a different case if it's a program worker maybe, but that's something I wouldn't do now. And in fact, I did a story about a month ago for the Sunday Independent. They asked me to do a story about USAID cuts and the impact on HIV patients not getting their drugs. And there was a little bit of debate because they sort of insisted that I send a picture of myself with the AIDS patient who I was interviewing. And I did succumb, and I did use the picture. It didn't fit well with me. I know sometimes Sunday Independent might be personality driven, but it's something I feel anyway we should stay away from. The next slides. Okay, and this is just a lesson I learned from those early years, a big lesson in terms of my assumption that, stark pictures actually create support. The first picture here is he was then 12. He's a boy called Promise, and I was with a hospice team one day driving through a slum area in Kampala about 2018, and he was strapped in a wheelchair on a street, and we stopped and we were told his mother had to work and he was on the street being minded by neighbours. So we hung around and waited for the mum to come back, and we got his story. He's spina bifida. He never really had any probably health supports, but the conditions he was living in were horrendous. So I took this picture and I did a post in the hope that we would get some money for the family. And instead of that, I got many messages from people urging me to take the picture down, which of course I did, saying that it was very distressful and disrespectful. So that was the one time when I really started to think about my approach. And in contrast, the second picture there was taken about 2 months later when Promise was under the care of hospice. He was coming into daycare every Tuesday. And he was thriving. He had a proper nutrition. He had medication for the muscle spasms that he was experiencing. And his mother was thriving also, and his little brother. And the second picture I posted, and that gleaned 2 very big donations from people in Ireland for the family. So that was a huge lesson to me, that you don't have to have the shock factor in order to get the support, in order to tell the story. And I find, I do a lot of work now with ActionAid Ireland remotely from here, and content gathering, and weekly with hospice. And it's those pictures showing people who are having such a positive impact, or their lives are being impacted positively because of the support that they've been getting. They're the powerful pictures, and that's the message that the donors and supporters they want. They want to see how their support is making a difference. So that's something that I follow religiously now. And just nearly at the end, but just in terms of pictures as well, this is a picture I took a few months back, and it's a picture that we've used in so many areas now in hospice. It was a dignified picture. The patient is very, very ill. He has cancer. He's living in terrible circumstances in a sort of a stone house. You can see the walls are just bare stone. And Nurse Beatrice with him, she's taking his blood pressure there. But that picture just shows everything that you need to know about Hospice Africa Uganda, their approach, the compassionate care. And that picture we've used on social media, in media, for graphics, for promotional material as well. And just finally then, I'll hand on, just when I go about my work now, I'm always really conscious, and I always ask myself certain questions, just to make sure I'm on the right track, because it's very easy to go off track. And the one thing, it's on the end here, but the one thing I often say is, would I be comfortable showing this picture to the subject or to the community? And I often actually do show the subject, the person, the patient, a picture I've taken, and I want, to see, are they happy with that? Is that a good reflection of where they are? Obviously, what's the purpose of the picture? Informed consent, it's so obvious now, but that's crucial, to have signed consent, informed consent. And even if, as I said earlier, if somebody signs and there is consent, it doesn't mean you have license to use that picture. And I find in my case with hospice, and actually on a field trip I did in Gulu with ActionAid last year, that there were times when I was encouraged to take pictures that wouldn't have been appropriate, because the local people or the beneficiary felt this is what the world needs to see. But you just have to use your own judgment. And also just power dynamics as well. And, pictures where you have, a wrong balance in relation to power between maybe the humanitarian, the white person, and the local person. It's something that needs to be watched as well. So I hope this was of some help to you, and delighted to be here and looking forward to questions later on. Thanks, Claudia.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Miriam, for sharing your insights and your experiences. My name is Claudia Lynch. I'm the project manager of Worldview, and for the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to be taking us through the Worldview Wave 5 imagery results. Now, this was quite a substantial piece of research encompassing a quantitative survey and 6 qualitative follow-up focus groups. So we could really dig into and explore Irish attitudes towards NGO imagery that we use in our campaigns. A bit about the research. We were aiming to explore what images motivate respondents to engage in an appeal, but also seeing what emotions do images trigger and how does this matter for engagement. We had 141 images submitted from 11 of our members, and 70 of these were then selected based on a range of different attributes such as gender, age, emotion, eye contact, and so on. These 70 images were seen between 175 and 179 times in the survey, and then a subset were selected for the focus groups. There's 3 overarching themes I want to begin the presentation with today that came out of the research. They are progress, agency, and transparency. Progress. We found that people don't want to feel hopeless. That shuts them off immediately. There has to be a sense that change or progress is possible, which leads to agency. We need to have clear roles for the individual in our campaigns, appeals, messaging, narrative, and comms. There has to be a sense that I can contribute to that change that is possible. And finally, transparency. This is just how we as a sector can continue to combat mis and disinformation aimed at us by just being clear, direct, open, and honest. We're moving to the results. Well, the good news is when shown an image, Irish respondents say they are more likely to want to engage or learn more about an appeal. What images resonated and which did not connect? Well, here are the top 10 images most selected for finding out more information. This information is all available online and will be shared with you after, so I won't hang around on this slide for too long. But, take a few seconds to take in the colors, the protagonist. Does a story begin to unfold when you look at this image? Here are the bottom 10 images least selected for finding out more information. Again, take in the colors, the emotion. Does a story unfold, or is it a bit one note? Is it a full stop image? Is it a clear image? Do we know what's going on here? From the quantitative survey, we found several different indicators to increase and decrease engagement. For increasing image engagement, the research found that images that elicit more extreme emotional responses are more likely to generate engagement. Similarly, both positive and negative images can stimulate engagement. Now, positive and negative emotions have different levels of energy. You can have a positive activated emotion, which would be, happy, delight, excitement, while a positive deactivated emotion would just be content or relaxed. A negative activated emotion would be anger, distress, while a negative deactivated emotion would be depression or hopelessness. That negative deactivated emotion we found does not stimulate engagement with images. Top images from the survey nearly always involved children. Half featured crisis or extreme need, while half were hopeful or showed progress. When it comes to the Worldview audience segments, it's unsurprising the most engaged and supportive of the sector segments, the global citizen, multilateralist, and community champions, are the most likely to engage in our appeals. But what doesn't connect or resonate? Well, the least effective images tended to include organizations' members, adults, and rarely included young or distressed children and empowered women and girls. Now, this is where I want to stop and pause and say, this is the reason why we're having today's webinar, because we need to contextualize these results within the framework of ethical communications, within best practice for ethical communications, which Miriam has already, brilliantly indicated. So the question is, where can we take this? Well, the good news is by doing the follow-up focus groups, we're really able to dig into these kind of top line results more. And we found a set of factors we think the sector can take forward in selecting our images. These are the 6 factors we found through the research that influence reactions to images. They are photographic fidelity, authenticity of scenario, impact, protagonist meaning, viewer connection, and storytelling power. Now, we can kind of think of these 6 factors like a checklist. The more of them that a photo has, the more likely we will get positive engagement with the photo and therefore appeals. And we might not necessarily tick off all of these factors, but 2, 3, 4, 5 is a good aim to get. Before I get into explaining these factors, I want to share a little bit more about the focus groups that we had. We had 6 focus groups around the country, one with each worldview segment, bar the community champion. Now, we did this because the community champion is very similar to the global citizen. They're very supportive and engaged with our sector and with the organizations that are all here today. By not having a community champion focus group, this enabled us to have 2 empathizer focus groups. Now, this was key for 3 reasons. First of all, the empathizer is the largest worldview audience segment. We have over 1 million empathizers in Ireland. Secondly, it actually has quite a large age range. So we know the empathizer segment is overwhelmingly female, but it ranges from about 25 up to 54. By having 2 empathizer focus groups, we could have an older and a younger cohort. And finally, the third reason is we know that you, our members, are very interested and want to engage the empathizer. You know, our working theory is if we reach an empathizer with messaging and images that resonate, they should be ripe for upward engagement with the sector. Let me introduce you to the emotional circumplex model. Now, this is a model which organizes emotions along 2 main axes: activation or energy and valence, so positive or negative. We used this model in the focus groups to help guide the focus groups' identification of their emotions. So as I've already kind of indicated, you can have high energy positive emotions like alert and excitement, low energy positive emotions like being calm and relaxed, high energy unpleasant emotions like being tense and angry, and finally, low energy, unpleasant emotions like depression, hopelessness, and boredom. So we found that last quadrant doesn't really stimulate engagement, so we need to focus on the other 3. In the focus groups, respondents were shown images one by one. And we first asked them for their system 1 reaction or their gut reaction at a personal level. So the image would be shown and they would be told to note their personal immediate reaction or emotion to the image. We then would open up to system 2 reactions. This is where the focus group would open up to discussion to explore the layers of reactions and interpretations amongst the group. But back to our factors and what they all mean. Well, first we have impact. The immediacy of an image interesting our attention can make a big difference to our reaction to it. We're all exposed to a lot of visual content daily, and we've become adept, almost unconsciously, at screaming out images that do not reach a certain level of impact. Essentially, impact is generated by a sense of drama, portrayed in combination with a sense of image novelty. We can ask ourselves, will this image stand out from other images? Does this image portray something new? And an image that had a lot of impact is this image here, image number 66. Now, all the images that were shown in the focus groups have a number, which you'll see in the right-hand corner, but I'll come back to this in a little bit to explain why. This image was technically the most successful out of all the research. Both the quantitative survey and qualitative focus groups identified this image as the one that they would most likely like to find out more information about. And that's because it has a lot of impact. There's a sense of chaos juxtaposed with a sense of stillness. And we're immediately drawn to the young protagonist and the sense of bewilderment in her face. And we're all wondering, what is she looking up at? And so all the segments, all the worldview audience segments found this to be a very impactful photo. Protagonist meaning. A lot of successful images draw our attention to an individual protagonist, sometimes juxtaposed with others or in a particular relationship with their environment. Thinking about our checklist, that was the previous image that we just saw of the girl. Reactions are largely influenced by perceptions of the protagonist's situation or relationship with others. In particular, respondents react strongly to a sense of a protagonist's vulnerability, jeopardy, and emotional state. And all three of these are encompassed in this image here. Now, I think it's worth noting that the focus group system one, across the board, all the kind of segments, their first gut reaction or system one reaction to this image was, distress, very upset. But then when it was opened up to discussion for the system two reaction, people actually became angry that this photo was taken and kind of turned on the photographer in a way, saying, why did the photographer feel the need to take this photo? Why did the photographer not go over and help the young boy? So it is an interesting, it's an interesting point that, the public is aware that images are being taken. They're not just standalone. But all the worldview focus groups, worldview audience focus groups, they're immediately drawn in to the young protagonist here. He's clearly upset, he's dirty, his shoe has fallen into this puddle. There's absolutely no one around him. He's not in a clean and safe environment. And so it really struck a chord with all of them. There was one empathizer that literally said, if there was a way I could just reach out and take this boy home and he could live with me, I would. Viewer connection. It's clear that some images connect more strongly with us than others. At times, respondents from the focus groups almost immediately reference their reactions in terms of similar experiences in their own lives. This relatability can operate at an almost unconscious or gut level, or it can emerge more slowly from consideration and comparison with an image. This is an image that really connected with all of the worldview audience segments because it's a very familiar experience. We've just come out of a global pandemic, and I'd say we've pretty much all had at least one vaccine recently. So we all connect with this woman. We're drawn into her face. There's a sense of comedy about it that the different segments picked up on. They said, I was the exact same, or my daughter or my husband put the exact same face. Some people were literally holding their arm saying, I was the exact same in that situation. So we're immediately relating to her in a positive way. But then people began to kind of take in the rest of the photo. They said, well, it's great that she's getting a vaccine, and the person doing it is obviously trained. They have gloves on, they have a mask. There's chairs and people in the background. Oh, this is a vaccine drive. Oh, that's brilliant. And so that's the kind of train of thought or story that each of the segments, followed with this image. We know what's going on here. It's clear what's going on here. We connect with this woman in a positive way. It's also worth noting that this is a very visually attractive image. We're drawn in by the pinks and the blues and the woman's beautiful attire as well. Storytelling power. As respondents discuss their reactions, it's evident that some images unfold with more sense of a background story than others, as we had just seen in the previous image. Therefore, a story that is expressed with clarity tends to have more effect, particularly if it can be interpreted as connecting to a current international issue. Similarly, stories can have a symbolic meaning that can make them more engaging. So expressing the experience of motherhood or the relationships between siblings and sibling care. This is another very positive and warm image. And it's worth noting that pretty much all of the worldview audience focus groups found symbolic meaning in this photo. They said that the relationship between the man and the cow, it's almost like a pet. Some people said, that's how I act around my dog. So there's symbolic meaning here that the focus groups identified, but it's also clear what's going on here. This man is obviously appreciative for this cow, and people were able to concoct a whole story around this image because we know what's going on here. The focus groups would say, well, the man is, maybe an organization has given this man this cow, he's erected this pen for the cow, and the cow's clearly clean, it's very healthy looking, and it's relaxed around the man. So the man is obviously taking good care of this cow because it's obviously giving him something in return. And so these are the stories that the focus groups concocted from just this image because it's clear and we know what's going on. Authenticity of scenario. Images can be a candid moment from someone's life or a more staged arrangement. It's really important to note that there can be rapid negative response when respondents felt like there was a deliberate attempt to manipulate their reaction. Is it a highly emotive scene that has been engineered for effect? Also worth noting that a perceived link to an active news story actually supports a sense of authenticity and recency. We also need to keep in mind that people are trained by daily experiences to discern the difference between photoshopped or heavily edited or AI generated images and real moments. This is a brilliant example of an authentic scenario that resonated with all of the focus groups as well, it's worth noting. We're immediately drawn into the young protagonist, the girl at the front, and she's almost looking just beyond the camera, like she's looking at the photographer. We're drawn in by her smile and all the other kids' smiles, and she's clearly about to throw something at the photographer. There's a sense of energy to this photo that the respondents identified, and it was clear to them all that this is an authentic scenario. It's not a staged scenario. It's also worth noting that some people said that they could almost hear the giggles and the laughter in this image. So it's interesting to think about how our senses kind of interpret images as well. But it's clearly an authentic scenario. And again, thinking of the other factors, people connected to our protagonist, some saying, oh, it's exactly like the look on my daughter's face when she's about to do something she shouldn't. So we're, again, connecting to the relatability, we're connecting to the image and the protagonist. I wanted to show this image because it's a bit of an interesting case. To be honest, all the focus groups were pretty ambivalent to it. You know, they said it's great. I mean, they're getting water, but it's not that engaging of an image, impactful. You know, we're not that drawn into it. But there's something in this image that at least one person in every single focus group noted. And once they said it to the group, everyone in the focus group immediately turned off. It's this camera right here. I know if this image was going to be used in a campaign or appeal, it would be cropped out. But I think it's an interesting story to note. Again, the public are aware that photographs are being taken, that an image is being taken. But at least one person in every single focus group, I thought it was so interesting, noticed this camera, because I didn't even notice it. And they immediately, the whole group actually almost turned off and got angry that they were feeling that they were being manipulated to feel a certain way. Photographic fidelity. The simple quality of a photo has an influence on our reactions. Is the protagonist easily to discern from the background detail? Is there a dramatic use of color? Are we drawn in by some eye contact or a smile? The fact of the matter is that images with more emotional impact just tend to often be simply better quality photos. This is an example of a brilliantly shot photo. We're immediately drawn in by the warmth. It's well lit, and there's rich colors. We're instantly drawn to the mom and the young baby. We're drawn in by the baby's eye contact and smile, and the mother's wonderful beaming smile as well. So good quality photos, they just resonate. And again, thinking of the other factors at play, people, I was actually amazed how many of the segments noticed the nutrition pack. And so they would say, oh, well, I know that's obviously one that NGOs give out. So obviously an NGO has come along and now the baby has food in its belly, so it's happy. And now the mom's happy because the baby's got food in its belly. And that's literally the kind of train of thought that the focus groups had. So again, we're seeing the different factors at play in this image. This is what I wanted to come back to. So each of the images used in the focus group, you'll see all of them on the left-hand side here. They're each numbered. And then the researchers plotted them onto the emotional circumplex. We can see up here, number 35, high energy, positive emotion. That is the photo of the kids with the flower that we saw. Image number 68, it's a more high energy, unpositive emotion. It's the photo of the young boy by himself. So, you know, this is almost something you could do in your own organization. Get your different teams together, your fundraising, your advocacy, your comms. Select a few photos that you're planning on using in an upcoming appeal or campaign and get people's different reactions to system one, the system two, and see if you can plot them on the circumplex. Keeping in mind that the ones in the kind of red pink quadrant here, they tend, the lower down they are, the less likely you will get engagement with them. To conclude, emotional resonance is key. Images that drew the strongest reactions sparked feelings of connection, empathy, curiosity, concern, and hope. We need to balance urgency with agency. Motivating images don't just evoke a sense of pity, but actually make the viewers feel like they can support in a meaningful way. We should target real human experiences expressed with emotion. We need to avoid tropes and stereotypes using arresting, fresh imagery. Finally, we need to simplify our messaging and avoid unintended and distracting elements. Above all, our focus should be on the individual and their experience. I'll now hand over to Niall to contextualize this all a bit more within the Dóchas Ethical Communications Guidelines. But just to say, these slides will be shared afterwards, and they are all up on our website. So I will stop sharing now, and Niall, let you take over to take us through the guide.
Hey everyone, can you hear me okay?
Yep, all good.
Good. Thank you very much, Claudia, for that. I think as you can all see, the level of detail that went into our research last year was quite big. But whenever we got the results back and sort of looked through them, we thought anytime we sort of spoke of these images, it's important to sort of just bring in our own ethical communications guide as not even a counterpoint, but just as to sort of contextualize it a bit, as Claudia said. So many of you will know what the guide is. It may be sitting in your offices, and it may be something you look through from time to time. It's available on our website if anyone doesn't have it, easily downloaded. So this was launched a couple of years ago. As we say there, it's a resource for INGOs to help guide their communications when designing, implementing the communications that go out. So there's 4 points in this guide that I'll very quickly take you through. First, authentic representation. As you can see here, it's the idea that we would commit to providing truth and context when portraying individuals and communities. So you can see the sort of, I won't go through them, there's a lot of reading there, but you can see the 4 points that we look specifically at. As Claudia pointed out, these slides will be available, so you can always read back through them there. But the important part for us on representation is that we are covering what we see, not an image that some presumers there, or even worse, an image that someone wants to portray. In the guide, we've come up with a sort of couple of, ideas that people can use, sort of tick lists, similar to what Miriam had, which is always good and useful. And a couple of those include captions with images as a rule, unless there's a specific or justifiable reason not to. Name regions, localities, or communities, and where possible and appropriate, include exact information about people and places. Contributor-led stories and local content is our second part. It's putting people and communities at the heart of the stories. This is a big issue for our sector. The idea of locally led development is something that a lot of people are working on. I suppose it's trying to change the quote-unquote Western perspective of aid and development in the global South. And a couple of examples in the guide that we sort of have for contributor-led stories and local content is, where possible, to use local staff or agency freelance content providers, be they photographers, videographers, researchers, or interviewers. Luckily for you, you'll hear from Andrew in a few minutes, who will be able to go through that much better than I would. Also, employed skilled, trusted local translators or interpreters appropriate to the situation. As an example, as we mentioned in the guide, some cultures, it's better to use female translators for interviews with women. Thirdly, we look at informed consent. So this is the commitment that all content is obtained with the full understanding, participation, and permission of those featured. This is extremely important tenet in the idea of bringing the story back to the local population, and the contributor being an equal participant in the story. And there are lots and lots of ways to use this in practice. As I said, they're all in the guide, but I'll give you a few. Get written permission, or at the very least, verbal consent before taking and using photographs or video footage of individuals. Using a pre-prepared printed consent form or digital app can help in that. After you've taken the images, show them to the people who appear in them and ask if they're happy with them. And ensure that what is agreed with the contributors at the outset, for example, at an interview stage, is respected all the way through the process, including post-production, and even long after the event where the content is still in use, be it up online, whatever that may be. For a lot of us here, it's worth pointing out when we're talking of informed consent that GDPR requirements also play into getting consent for EU organizations. So very much worth keeping that in mind. On our final point, upholding standards and doing no harm. This is sort of one of the guiding lights when it comes to ethical communication, certainly within Dóchas, to conform to the highest standards in international instruments relating to human rights and commit to the protection of people in vulnerable situations. So some of the examples that we mention in the guide are the UN Declaration of Human Rights, the UN Convention of the Right of the Child, and the UN Convention on the Right of People with Disabilities. General principle here being that the individual whose stories we tell must come first, not necessarily the organization. And again, a couple of practical steps that we can use here is to consider the power imbalances, be they perceived or real, between INGO personnel and communities or individuals, in particular where people may feel under pressure to participate in content creation. Avoid creating an expectation that people might benefit directly through the receipt of aid or resources by taking part, and carry out a risk assessment in line with your safeguarding policy. Are you confident that you will not expose individuals to personal risk through your work? So there are the sort of 4 points. It's a very quick sort of zip through them, but it gives you an idea and maybe a sort of a different way of looking at what we were talking about with Claudia's imagery there. So I put in this final slide more as a thinker than anything else. We've seen where the public stands in imagery, and we've seen the sort of, I've written the ethical contrast, but I suppose just the other side of things a little bit maybe. So I suppose for all of us on this call here, we're interested in this topic. The question is, where do we go next? We released this imagery, I believe 3 days before Donald Trump was inaugurated. So 3 days later, the USAID started to get dismantled with the Trump administration, and things changed. Our sector is now in crisis. We all know that. So we need fundraising. We need as much of it as we can. So I suppose the question is, do we abandon our ethics and go for the dramatic, knowing that maybe that might get some people interested? Or do we use this as a time to reset and double down on the ethical values in our communication? There's no answer here. This is very much a question. It's a thinker. But that's my sort of other side of things from where Claudia had. And luckily we have Andrew Katende, who's with us. He's a Ugandan photographer, and he'll sort of be able to give us exactly what it's like working on the ground. So Andrew, I am very happy to use your slides, and you just tell me when to move on to the next one.
Sure. All right. Thanks, Niall and Claudia, for this opportunity. And I'm happy to present this ethical class. The title of my presentation is basically the 5 most common ethical breaches. They could be 50 or 60, but these 5 I have found in my career that they are the most common, the most recurring per se. So a brief introduction about me. Next slide, please. Yes, I'm a freelance photographer. I've been at this for 8 years. I do documentary photography and film. I work for NGOs, projects, INGOs. I do fundraising campaigns, project reports, communication support, and content development. I'm originally from Uganda, but I work in Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Ethiopia, and South Sudan. That's basically the eastern part of Africa and a bit of Central Africa. Next slide. So I work in of course, diverse sectors, because a lot of NGOs work in different sectors depending on the grants that they receive. So that is agriculture, health, education, environment, humanitarian, water, human rights, child development, and whatever gets thrown at me, I get to do the literature into it. And yeah, that's just a brief background about me. Next slide. So, this being an ethical class, this is a quote that I hear so many times on the ground while we're doing work. I mean, someone will blatantly breach ethics and they'll say, no, they'll never know. Who will know, you know? So that's usually the start. That's when you know that there's going to be an ethical breach. And every time you hear that statement in Africa, just know someone is going to breach ethics. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is just a disclaimer, because most of the stories that I'm going to tell you and most of the pictures that I'm going to show in this presentation can be reverse searched to the clients. And I hope that this is strictly for educational purposes and I cannot testify. If you look in the background on the right side, that is me turning my back on anyone trying to get me to testify against my clients. Yeah, so I think we can get into it. Yeah. Yes, so this is just a brief summary of my entire presentation, the 5 ethical breaches. So we're going to follow the production process to see at what point most ethics is broken. So we have pre-production. This is the institutional ethics. This is your part as an organization. We have production, that is now me on the ground, and then post-production, which is usually a collective effort between the NGO and the creative. So at the pre-production stage, you usually have sector-sensitive language that is not upheld by some clients. We have creative bias that is usually passed on, because most organizations work with a top-to-bottom approach, where the decisions are made from the top and then passed down onto the creative. So usually there are breaches in ethics because I am biased before I even go to work. So we have stage management, which sometimes we do in the field because, of course, a staff or someone does not really wants to impress their boss, and then they strong arm the creative to do something they're not supposed to. And then post-production, which is manipulation, and then distribution, which has a flame on it, because if I was a lawyer and I wanted to get rich quick, I'd probably use that to get money fast from organization, because that's where ethics is breached the most. Yeah, so we can get into the first step. Yeah, so these are just a few examples on organizations that I've worked with in the community-based rehabilitation and community-based inclusive development sector, especially working with persons with disabilities. This can also apply in your sector. Using a phrase disabled people, it's considered very wrong and inappropriate. We need to pay attention to that. And sometimes you see these phrases in the terms of reference coming from the head of communication or the head of fundraising, and they're unaware of these simple language ethical breaches. You need to refer to them as persons with disabilities. So later we will see the effect of this, that when you make these mistakes in the terms of reference, it comes down to when I'm captioning the pictures, when I'm delivering. So you'll see a calendar or spread or print with this error, and it's mostly overseen. When dealing with HIV/AIDS as well, the phrase AIDS victim or someone who is HIV infected you're blaming the person, you know? So of course, using things like someone living with HIV/AIDS is a better. So down here, I say that the terms of reference should be the foundation of ethical language and ethical behaviors. So before you push what you require from the creative, it is better to review the terms of reference, because it is that someone needs to read between the lines and understand. Next slide, please. So here's an example of a picture that I took in Gulu, Uganda. Elungat pushes Chelimo Gloria, a disabled classmate, over a classroom ramp in Gulu, Uganda. That's the wrong caption, because you're calling Gloria a disabled classmate, you know? because these captions are added into the metadata of the images. So wherever the image is shared, this information moves with it. So the image is being distributed with an ethical breach. The correct caption is the one in yellow. Enungat Moses pushes Chelimo Grace, a classmate with disability. So it's the person first, then the disability next. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is an image we did. I was on assignment with Miriam, I think, in Gulu, Uganda again. A teenage HIV/AIDS victim carries her child whom she mothered at the age of 14. So you're calling her an HIV/AIDS victim. So basically you're putting blame on her, whereas the best caption is a teenage mother living with HIV/AIDS carries. I mean, this, I had to point this out because it's very recurring and people always overlook this. So let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, so the next thing is creative bias. This I cannot show you, but I pulled out quotes from different terms of references that I have received from different clients. So someone will tell you, Andrew, we need you to show the effectiveness of our medical interventions by featuring healthy patients. I find that quite hilarious. I mean, healthy patients interacting happily with our staff and should exclude untreated patients or scenes that suggest delay in care or medical shortages. So before I even get on the ground, I'm already biased and drawing the kind of picture that you have in mind. Yeah. And then when we're dealing with refugee interventions, we have someone telling you that we want images that convey hope among refugees, focusing on happy individuals in a clean, organized setting. If anyone has been to Africa in a refugee camp, clean and organized is never part of the equation. Yeah, so this is now changing my expectations of the kinds of pictures that I should deliver, and then telling me to avoid visuals of overcrowding and unsanitary conditions. So most cases when I get there, and this is in the terms of reference, the organizational staff are gonna stage manage to make sure that each and everything mentioned here is achieved. So you're not going to get an authentic story because they're trying to make it clean, they're trying to make it organized, so that's what happens with creative bias. So the next slide, please. Yeah, scene stage managing, it's exactly what it is. Putting things together that are not supposed to be there because of the bias that I mentioned earlier. Next slide. So this is the perfect example. So this was an agricultural NGO, and they had supported a couple of people. So the staff on the ground were under quite a lot of pressure to have healthy looking maize and a nice subject for, again, the terms of reference. So we had to get maize that wasn't actually there and try out a couple of beneficiaries on the same maize. If you notice, it's the same trampoline, it's the same exact maize. So this is not the fact that is on the ground. And this happens so often. I cannot begin to tell you how often this happens. So when you want honest and real reportage, it's important to stay away from the bias that's in the terms of reference. Then it won't trickle down to this point. The next slide, please. Yeah, then of course, this can go as an oversight, but there's a lot of photo manipulation that's done by creatives, again, because we want, again, to make our clients really happy about what they want to receive. So there's in the next slide, you'll see the perfect example. Next slide. Yeah, so this is something that I did for, again, community-based rehabilitation, where we have a blind student studying with other students using a braille. You can see them. So on the left, you see the actual picture that was taken. But because, again, the local office felt that, oh, head office always prefers to have pictures of people smiling, can we make the child smile? So there comes the manipulation. If you look on the right, if you had never seen the photo on the left, you would never know that that smile is actually added there in post-production. And it's an ethical breach. And these are things that, again, when they say they'll never know, but I'm the creative, I know. So I know what is happening because there's a confidentiality contract and all that. I can never say this out, but this actually happens. And we need to pay attention to that, especially when local employees of NGOs on the continent are put under a tight spot. These are the lengths that they will go to get you the content that you want. Next slide, please. So again, like I said earlier, if I was a lawyer that wanted to get rich quick, distribution would be the easiest way in to get organizations and NGOs on the continent sued, because most people will get in there and get people to sign consent forms for, say, for print, or no, we're going to use this on our calendar, or we're going to print this in a small book, and of course the subjects are going to be happy about this. Then when these images are added onto a bank, the organization uses them for completely different things. So there's an example in the next slide, please. So this is a boy that I photographed for an agricultural NGO, and the photo was added into a photo bank for an organization. But I think 3 years later, the photo was still in the bank, so they got a grant that's to do with family planning, and they felt, oh well, we can just use this guy. And then if you look at the poster on the right, I had to take a picture of it because I was moving in one of the hospitals in Uganda, and I was shocked to see that they're saying my cows have increased because I support my wife to use pills, family planning pills. We have a family and I afford to look after. That was not at all the context of the story under which these pictures were taken. And I'm sure if he could read, he would be pretty mad about this. And this happens very, very, very much. The next slide, please. Yeah, so this was, excuse the green markers, I was just trying to cover the details of the clients. This is something that we did in a refugee camp. So over the years, I've shot for this client different pictures in different refugee camps in East Africa. So when they were doing a fundraiser, they felt it's right, oh, well, we can just say all these kids are from one refugee camp. But if you look at those pictures, it's just the black and white girl on the extreme left. She's the only one from BDVD. All these others come from, I think, 4 different refugee camps in Kenya and Uganda. But so they put all this in one and then blew them out and printed them. I didn't feel right about this, but it happens because, I mean, somebody's gotta raise funds, but we need to do it the ethical way and distribute these pictures the right way and not misrepresent the subjects. So yeah, I think that's just as far as I'll go. Next slide, please. Yeah. So I have a couple of recommendations to curb these kind of ethical breaches. Is we need to include an integrity of work clause in our contract, because sometimes I feel that I could do something, but contractually I am unable to do so, and I'm unable to push back. But I feel like we need to do this because we are informed about this. Sometimes the staff on the ground are ignorant about the ethical approaches we need to take. We need that. And then, of course, we need to add a consent and subject dignity clause. I feel like this can help a lot, especially when you're working with photojournalists who are very cautious about ethics. And then down here, that gentleman called Bart Nice is a Dutch mentor of mine. And while he was teaching me ethics, he says that trust comes on a tortoise and lives on a horse. And I only say this because it will only take one picture to tarnish the reputation of an organization. And the picture is not anywhere connected to what the organization is doing. So we need to be really, really cautious about our ethical approaches. And the final slide. Yep. Thank you very much for listening to me.